and my name is Dr. Chabi Dubey, and I will be taking this course for you. So, in last class, in the previous class yesterday, we were talking about various quantitative methods or research designs that we have studied. So, we talked about um, experimental designs. We were talking about quasi-experimental designs, various types of experimental and quasi-experimental designs, and we were also learned. We've also learned about how these designs are useful in carrying out social work research. We have also studied about the utility as well as some of the flaws that you will find in all of these methods. Now, yesterday, when we were doing the second module, we were left with one of the last unit, which talked about the qualitative research. So, just briefly, we will go through that last unit before we start with the third block. So, I will be presenting my screen. So, as you can see, this is the fourth unit, that is the research methods or the qualitative in qualitative research. Now, basically, we have seen there are two types of researches based upon the type of data that it is used. One is known as a quantitative research, and the second is known as a qualitative research. Now, quantitative researches are basically research which are more based on numeric data or quantitative data. So, in most of the various disciplines of social sciences which are concerned about the quantitative aspect, like research in economics, research in management, and some other uh, uh, subjects, we will find they are heavily dependent on getting designs on the designs which are quantitative in nature. Now, apart from that, we have another type of a research which is known as a qualitative research. Now, qualitative researches is basically they are dependent more on the qualitative data. Okay, so this unit discusses all about the qualitative research. Now, in the previous chapter, most of the methods that we have discussed pertaining to social research, like quasi-experimental or experimental researches, they were basically quantitative methods. Now, there are certain other qualitative methods, like you have the participatory research methods or the case study methods, action research, which you call. These are all known for their qualitative aspect. Now, the qualitative research denotes investigations concerning the social phenomena conducted in the natural settings, and that is in their original settings. And mostly it is identified with the concept of field studies, especially in areas like anthropology and sociology and social work. And it has quite a unique position in conduct of research in social sciences. And of late, it has become very, very popular with social scientists. Now, one of the first method here is the case study method. Now, this is a method which is quite an intensive investigation, which is concerned with the pertinent aspect of a particular unit in a given situation. So, for example, case study could be done for a particular community, or say a village or a tribal group. It could be also pertaining to a particular organization. Okay, it could be pertaining to any specific, a unit in a given situation. Now, it could also be in terms of any social institution. Now, a case study is generally conducted on individuals, and it may be linked with the process of growth and development, say, like in terms of child growth, in terms of behavior of gifted children or specially abled children, or even in, like roles of leadership, and studies of social movements, all of these things. Another thing is the participatory research we have already seen in the previous chapter, the first unit. Participatory research is also a very important research in the qualitative researches. Now, basically, qualitative researchers they have some very distinct conceptual framework which takes into account certain factors. So, we will be discussing these factors. One is the concept of multiple realities. Multiple realities means that, especially when we are studying a particular phenomena in a given context or in the natural context, we have to we generally assume that there can exist multiple realities in social situations. Okay, now for any particular social situations there can be multiple realities, and these can be very much deeply observed and researched by the researcher, like the way people perceived about their environment, about their situation, the different mental constructs, the personality traits, there can be so many different sides to it. And in other words, realities are taken to be what people perceive about a particular situation at a particular point of time. So we can say that qualitative research, it follows this conceptual framework, which is following multiple, having multiple realities. The second one is the meanings and interpretation that we take into account. Now, generally, when we are studying things in their natural setting, we have to emphasize study of meanings given to or interpretations made about certain objects, events, or processes concerning social situations. Now, these again will depend upon the culture. It will depend upon the the overall context of the individual or that particular phenomena. So again, the meanings will differ. ठीक है, okay, then the interpretations are going to differ. So all of these things, they are definitely going to differ. So again, we will have different meanings of the different situations which are presented to us. After that, we come to the third aspect, which is called as the generation of knowledge. Now, generally, we will find that qualitative inquiry is dependent more on generation of knowledge. That means that when you are talking about, when you are talking about carrying out research in the qualitative aspect, it is more about generation of generation of knowledge or creation of theories. Okay, now, respondents here, they will be answering the questions which would be put forth by the inquirer or the researcher. And interactions which take place between the researcher and the respondents, they will be used to achieve maximum level of responsiveness and insights concerning the problem. So, generation of knowledge is a very important aspect of qualitative research. Then comes your generalization. Generally, naturalists they generally do not believe in the process of generalization, which is generally propounded by scientists as in the natural sciences, because we have already seen that in social sciences, specifically for subjects like social work, sociology, you cannot have any kind of a generalized knowledge because the context will differ of the persons, the cultural settings will be different. So all these things will be different for different social phenomena, and that is why we cannot come to any kind of a generalization. Then next comes the human relations. Now, when we are studying social phenomena, that means that we are dealing with a lot of human relations, and there are certain several intrinsic factors which keep on influencing these relationships. So these can be the external factors, these can be internal factors, and again, the relationship will differ from person to person, it will differ from time to time and from place to place. So, all of these things you will find that it is not possible to identify one to one cause and effect relationship when we come to qualitative studies. Then come the value system. When we are talking about research in field of social sciences, we cannot have a value free inquiry, because anywhere when we are dealing with social sciences, we know that uh, uh, the bias will definitely be there, because not only the researcher comes from a background, the persons who are the respondents, those who are being a part of the research work, they also come with a different background, with a particular background, with some particular, thoughts, thought processes, perceptions, ideologies. So definitely you cannot believe in a total value free inquiry as it is possible in a physical sciences. So definitely, in we have to assume as social scientists that the influence of the value systems will definitely be there, especially when we are identifying problems, when we are selecting the samples or the tools that we are doing using for data collection. So all of these things are going to have a very big role or influence by the value system. So these are the basic aspects of what we have seen about the qualitative research method. Now, how the qualitative research is unique, how procedurally it we see that it is unique and different from the quantitative research. First of all, qualitative researchers are quite, they believe in having a holistic approach, develop a very deeper understanding of the situation. So every possible information concerning a significant social phenomena or situation under study is gathered with the view to portray the situation in their totality. So we try to see the situation as a whole or in totality. And that is why we say that it comes with a holistic approach. Second is it's a very insightful inquiry. That is, humans are treated as a sole means of data collection. Qualitative methods like participant observations, they there are methods which are pertaining specifically to qualitative methods, like you have methods like participant observation, then you have informal interviews and discussions, group discussions, then observations, no, writing on notes and diary writing, okay, reading of relevant literature. These are often very much used for field work, and these are offer a very insightful inquiry. So it becomes a very unique proposition for the qualitative method. The third is what is known as the no a priori theory, which means that a researcher, when he goes to the field for data collection without having any pre-specific theory in mind, so we are not going to go with any kind of a pre-specific theory that this is what is going to come out of it or likely going to come out of it. We are going there without any kind of expectations of the what is going to, what output we are going to get, or what are the result that we are going to get, or any kind of a theoretical constructs in our mind. We are going to go there, see, carry out the work, and study the whole phenomena from a very holistic perspective. And that is why we say that we do not have we have a no a priori theory. Okay. Then next we come to the no pre-specific design of study. Here we do not go with any explicit statement on the hypothesis and the conditions which the data are to be collected, analyzed, and interpreted. Okay. The researcher will develop only a broad outline of the study in advance. And here we will find that as the inquiry progresses, we will come up with appropriate designs or hypotheses. Mostly in the question forms they are developed. So we are not going to have the hypothesis as we have in other methods or designs of research, but they are mostly in the question forms. And final decisions are generally taking about the sample or respondents of situations during the field work. Then another aspect is a qualitative setting. Generally, since we are conducting studies in realistic settings, they cannot be studied in fragmented and controlled situations. So, here we are talking about situations which are realistic as it is and without having any kind of a control on the situation. So whatever unfolds, whatever happens in the realistic situations, this is what we are going to study in a qualitative method of research. Now, here are some of the main steps. First of all, whenever we are designing or rather carrying out a qualitative research, there are certain steps that they have to be followed, certain sequences that we have to follow. First of all, is we have to identify the broader question of inquiry. What exactly do we intend to understand? What are the questions that are likely to be answered, or the data that has to be collected? So this is the broader inquiry that we need to identify. Second is we will be dealing with the second point would be collection of the initial level data. So once we know the questions in our mind, we are going to collect the initial data. This would be generally taken up from the people who would be a part of the inquiry. And then there are different data collection methods, like we've already seen. There can be things like group discussions, focus group discussions. There can be unstructured interviews, informal interviews, and so many other things which we use in order to observations which we used in case of collecting the initial level data. Now, here they have given the procedure for collection of data. So we will be studying the records and other documents, diaries, pictures, and photographs. So the data will be primary as well as the secondary. We will be interacting with the persons who are concerned with the program under the study. And then there will be our direct observation and experiences regarding the program or the situation. So this is the procedure that we follow for the collection of data. And as a field worker, generally we will find that use of purposive sampling of significant situations or behaviors that can be done. And generally we follow some very flexible approaches in the field to identify firstly the situation where participation can take place more intensely, the persons with whom intensive interaction is required, and the people with whom the casual dialogue is needed. So, this will be identified once the process of data collection is started. Now, even though a broad framework of sampling is done, but generally the actual process of sampling it takes place during the process of field work. So we will be using certain devices of data collection, like using about and observe situations using electronic appliances, audio recorders, video cameras. We may take up photographs or collect some relevant documents or literature about the problems. Then we may also plan some interviews, some informal interviews or dialogues, maybe have kind of a focus group discussions with the participants. So these are some of the devices or the methods of data collection that we will generally use. Now, we have to maintain separate records regarding what we observe in the situations, like our own observations. We have to also maintain separately the perception of respondents about the problems and events, how the participants perceive the problem under question, and of course, our own perceptions about the persons and their involvement in the program. So, all these things we have to find out and we have to keep separate records. Since there is no hypothesis prior to data collection, data is generally not manipulated directly to test the hypothesis. And irrespective of this, certain scrutiny of daily observation records and evidence may happen, you know, and you would identify the emerging themes and patterns, or identify certain phrases, or maybe action sequences, thoughts, feelings, etc. So we may do that. And generally, we will find that the fieldwork is conducted in different rounds. And at the end of the first round of intensive fieldwork, we may then analyze the qualitative data and refine the previous question. So it is again a very auto corrective process, you can say. So at every stage, you can, of course, generate certain context specific hypothesis for minute observation. So once you analyze whatever changes you want to make or whatever refinement you want to make to the previous questions, that can be done, and then the process can be carried forth. Then we come to the next stage of data analysis. Now, in qualitative studies, data are usually analyzed descriptively, and the synoptic views of descriptive data, they are referred for interpretation. So we have to basically interpret the qualitative data that we have. More specifically, the frequency data, they are presented in two or three-way contingency tables indicating the patterns of behavior. We may use certain non-parametric statistical techniques also, like there are certain tests like the chi-square test is there, man-whitney two-tailed test, rank order correlation technique is there. Now you need not get too much into details of these tests, but they can be used for data analysis. And generally, you can say that it's a cyclical process where the data is collected. It is generation of hypothesis is there, examination of data is there, further generation and modification of hypothesis is there, further data collection is there, and again verification is done till the research questions are identified and the patterns of refined relationships are arrived at. So it's kind of a cyclical process. You go to the different stages as and when is required in order to further refine the that particular stage. Now, there are certain issues regarding the trustworthiness and objectivity in the qualitative studies. Now, again, as it is said that qualitative studies, since it requires studying in their original situations and make studying human behavior as such, there are certain problems that generally we have to face when it comes to how trustworthy the findings are, because as we have said that there is a lot of subjectivity that goes on into the qualitative work. Now, so definitely, there are certain efforts that have been done to fix certain standards to track or to check the unworthiness, trustworthiness of a qualitative inquiry. And generally, these criteria are followed. So, first of all, we see the credibility, how credible the data seems to be, the transferability, that is the quality that makes it possible to derive the accurate meaning of information on interpretation available in specific context. So, how transferable the data is, how dependable the data is, and finally, confirmability. That is a possibility of studying the collected systematic information by different researchers. So, your research can be confirmed by other researchers that okay, it is definitely trustworthy. So now there are certain follow principles that are there to enhance the credibility and all these transferability, dependability, and confirmability of the qualitative studies. The first is a prolonged field work. The more field work we do, the more possible it is to bring about all these major, qualities. Second is persistent observation. That is, these observations need to be persistent, okay, and this definitely increase the credibility of the study. Interaction with colleagues, interaction with the respondents, all of these are very important. So these help also to share the researchers own apprehensiveness or anxieties concerning the field work and the data collection. Then a variety of data sources can be used by investigators. So they come with different perspectives, and they can definitely bring about more, variety to the study. Then study of varieties of adequate reference materials. So there could be, secondary data. use of some other things like pictures, films, videotapes, and other audio recordings and other such a secondary material which can be used. We can also cross-check the data and interpretations by some of the respondents. They can enhance the internal validity of the study. We can also increase the purposive sampling. Okay, so this can also help us to increase these qualities. And finally, the substantive description of events in specific context. It can be useful in establishing the readability and dependability of information and the conclusion. So all of these principles, they can be used in order to make the studies more trustworthy. Now there are certain problems that are there inherently when it comes to observation. First of all, we know that only a researcher with a clear understanding of the problem should take up the task of conducting a qualitative study. So it is not an everybody's piece of cake. It should be a person with a clear understanding of the problem who should get into this qualitative study, because of the fact that there is a lot of subjectivity that is involved. Then there are certain problems in situations in which an outsider researcher acts as a participant observer. So definitely, what happens that when we go and study some behavior of a particular group or a community, they may have certain apprehensions about them being observed, and they may actually not behave as in their original state. They may come up with certain kind of a behavior which may be different from genuine behavior. So this is something which is always there. So how comfortable the respondents are with the presence of the observer or the researcher. And generally, there's always the inside observer, that is a person from within the institution studied, who now acts as an observer, and he or she may make face such a certain major problems in the process of data collection. you know so he or she may get confused about his or her role about as an observer with that particular group. They may get some kind of a biased picture, or have certain kind of emotional involvement with the group. So then again, that objectivity cannot be fully there. So these are certain problems which are there with the observation part in the qualitative studies. After this, we come to an important method of qualitative study is the case studies method. As we know that case study method is a very it's an in-depth study of a particular case. So case could be in the form of family, it could be in the form of a social institution, a community, a cultural group. It could be any class or developmental program, anything it could be. It could also be of specific communities, like say a village community, it could be a caste community, a slum area. So all of these can be considered as a unit of investigation for a case study method. And here, when we take up the unit as a case study, it is treated as a whole in the context of a specific situation. So if you're taking a village, a community as a unit, then we will take the village as the whole case. Now, what is the purpose of the case studies? Why do we have to take up case studies? Now, case studies are generally conducted for developing a very deeper understanding about the intricate relationship that exists in the processual aspects of specific units to qualitative investigations. So they actually bring out the relationship existing in the processual aspect of specific unit. So it is not like very different from approaches of a naturalist. So many times what happens that a case study method is treated as a kind of a qualitative inquiry, and it may be the focus of a case study, or other approach may be used by the researchers. Now, case studies are generally conducted with a clinical purpose. They are treated as a diagnostic and a prognostic measure for clients' treatment. Like, this approach has a very psychotherapeutic background. Why? Because in social research, case studies are conducting for resolving different problems and bringing about improvement in institutions facing such problem. So generally, we will do case studies whenever we are doing with a clinical purpose or in order to treat or or diagnose a particular a problem, or conduct such certain kind of improvements or bring about certain improvements to the problem. Now, there are certain characteristics of case study method. First is the continuity in investigation. It is a very prolonged inquiry about the situations. Second, completeness. We say that the sound case study, it involves extensive collection of data concerning internal as well as the external environment. So it is these are very complete studies in itself. The data which is collected in case studies is generally very authentic because we are taking directly from the units. Okay, and these are generally the primary data, and multiple techniques are used generally in case of a case studies. Then the recordings that we generally bring that we generally have, they are supposed to be very confidential. They are not supposed to, as researchers, we have to appreciate, or we have to understand that these are confidential recordings, and we need to keep the data very confidential. And it's a very intellectual synthesis in its ways, because it has multi-method of inquiry that we use, that we deal with the in case of a case study, and a very appropriate synthesis of the data is necessary when we want to depict the uniqueness of the unit and to explore the various relationships involved. So definitely there's a lot of insightfulness, writing skills that is required, theoretical sophistication of the investigator. A lot of skills are required in order to carry out a case study method. Then we come to the main steps that are used in the case study. Now, in this method, first of all, the first step that we use is the selection of a case for investigation. So we are going to select whatever case we want to study. Then we go on to do data collection. So we will collect the data by various methods, which can be quantitative as well as qualitative, depending upon the basic objective of the research. Then finally, and then the third is to go for analysis of the first round of data. So whatever data we have collected in the first round, we will go with the we will analyze that data and come up with certain kind of a initial hypothesis. Then we go to the second round of investigation. Okay, and we go to all of these things again. We say it's a cyclical process since we've already discussed it before. We go for the second round, and then after that we will go for a follow up. And these generally investigations, the follow up investigations, they are used to give us feedback on the strength and weaknesses of the corrective measures. So this follow up part is very important in a case study method. Now, how scientific are case study methods? So, as we've already seen, case study methods are very scientific, irrespective of the fact that they have been undergoing a lot of criticism. Uh, all said and done, the case study method are generally considered to be very scientific, and though it has certain limitations, but its importance in the field of qualitative research methods, it cannot be neglected. Then now all these things characteristics makes it very scientific, because you are generating a hypothesis in a case study method. You are testing the hypothesis, and you're also generalizing the case study findings. So all these steps makes the case study method very highly scientific in nature. Then the next is the participatory research. The participatory research is generally conducted by people for depicting their existing situation by making maps and diagrams. Okay, so we basically, it is called participatory research because we are using people to participate in the research work. So we are actually helping a more inclusive kind of a research, where we are making the people participate in studying their situation. So we will help. So they will help in by making maps and diagrams about the, during the research process. and this is done in order to improve their own situation. So, a number of participatory approaches with different terminologies it has been introduced over a period of time in terms of participatory research work. Like one important aspect is the PRA, which is also, which is sorry, the RRA, which is known as the Rapid Rural Appraisal. Okay, and this term was then used to denote the relaxed rural appraisal. It later evolved into participatory rural appraisal or the PRA. And then a number of development professionals later called it the participatory learning and action or the PLA. Now, this is generally used to appraise existing situations specifically in the rural areas. Okay, it has been used in urban areas and in other fields like adult education. There are policy influencing and advocacy in organization development, and it is used not only for appraisal but also for various other purposes. Okay, so it is more comprehensive and suitable than any other participatory research methods. And the basic presumption of PRA here is that the poor and the marginalized people are capable of analyzing their own realities, and they should be enabled to do so. So their participation, their involvement in the development process, in the process of their own welfare is very important, and that they should be involved in this planning process altogether. Now, participatory rural appraisal, it employs varieties of techniques, like it could be meetings, it could be focus group discussions, it could be social drama, sharing of knowledge which is generated through various forms of folk art or oral and written and visual arts. So all of these things are generally used. Basically, participatory rural appraisal methods have been broadly classified into space-related rural participatory rural appraisal methods, time-related PRA, and relationship methods. So there are different types of PRAs that have been classified. These generally, the space-related PRA are useful in spatial dimension of people's reality. So basically, these methods will include social mapping, okay, and the focus is on how people perceive and relate to space rather than just to the physical aspect. And the second is a time-related PRA method, which is explore the temporal dimension, which allows people to use their own concept of time. Okay, and there are certain methods which are used here. For example, the timeline method is there, the trend analysis, historical transect is there, seasonal diagram, daily activity schedule, participatory genealogy, dream map. All of these methods are used in the time related PRA methods. After that, we come to the relationship methods. Relationship methods, they include flow diagrams, like they may show cause effect diagrams, they may have impact diagrams, system diagrams are there, network diagrams, and process maps. All these are used as a part of the relationship methods. Apart from this, there are other certain methods also, like you have the ranking method, the Venn diagrams, pairwise ranking, matrix scoring or ranking, pie diagrams, livelihood analysis, spider diagrams. All of these various aspects of mapping and diagrams are used in relationship methods. So this is all about this is all about the qualitative research methods in social work research. After that, now we will start with the third block of our social work research, which comprises of the tools and methods of data collection. Here we'll be looking at the different methods of sampling. We will be looking at the different research tools like questionnaires, rating scales, attitudinal scales, and tests. Then also other methods like interview, observation and documents, and finally the concept of data collection. So here we come to the methods of sampling that is used. So what exactly is termed by sampling? Sampling is basically, you can say that sometimes what happened that when we are studying a whole group, an extremely large group, then that is not possible to actually take the data or collect the data from the whole population, or from every individual involved in that population. So we need to take a part of the population as sample, and then that sample is used for collecting data, and this sample is considered to be a representative of the whole population. So whatever data we gather from this sample, we will understand that this represents the entire population. So a single unit of study, okay, in any research study is referred to as an element of population. So when we study a group of elements for studying a particular phenomena, we refer to that group of elements as a sample. Okay, so this is what exactly sample is all about. Now, generally, we will find that when we are sampling or when we are taking a sample, there are two important things that has we have to remember. Requirements of a sample. First of all, it should be representative of the whole population, and it should be adequate. So it should not be like we are going for very few individuals out of a population of 100 or a universe of 100. We are going for 10 or 15, which will hardly represent the whole population, and there has to be adequate samples. So definitely, these two are two important criteria or requirement for a sample. Now, there are different methods of sampling, which is generally broadly classified into two different types of sampling. One is known as the probability sampling, and the second is known as the non-probability sampling. Now, the probability sampling is based on random selection of units from a population. So here we will randomly select units from a population, that it is not based on certain, you know, a certain characteristics, or certain aspects that we are looking for, but we will select the sample at a in a random basis, on a random basis. So here there are things like, it may be done by a lottery system, or it may be done by following a list and other things. So every individual has equal chance of being selected here. So it's the probability sampling is based on the random sampling. Okay, that is random selection of individuals. So first of all, each unit in the sample, it will have equal probability of being a part of the sample. The weight appropriate to the probabilities are used in the analysis of the sample. And finally, the third characteristic is that the process of sampling is automatic in one or more steps of the selection of units in the sample. So these are the three important characteristics of a probability sampling. Now, under the probability sampling, we come to the first part that is known as a simple random sampling. Simple random sampling is basically a method of selecting a sample from a finite population in such a way that every unit of the population is given an equal chance of being selected in the sample. So here what are the steps that we are going to follow? We will first define the population. We will make a list of the units that are there in the population and the number that will be from, excuse me. Then we are going to decide the size of the sample or the number of units that have to be included in the sample. And we use either the lottery method or the random number tables to pick the units that have to be included in the sample. So this is a form of simple random sampling. Now this is how the table has been made for random numbers. After that, we come to the systematic sampling. Now, this was a simple random sampling. After that comes a systematic sampling. Now, systematic sampling, you can say, is it provides a more even spread of sample over the population. And how we are going to do a systematic sampling is, first we're going to make a list of the population based on a certain criteria. Right? It could be based on alphabetical order. It could be based on the on the thing of seniority, maybe street number, house number, or any such factor. But we are going to make a list of the population in some order. We will determine the desired sampling fraction. Say if we want to take 50 out of 1000, or maybe 100 out of 1000, so and so forth, and starting with a randomly chosen number. Okay, we are going to choose the different samples from this, and this is a very good method of sampling, just like simple random sampling, and it is comparatively a very easier method. Then we come to the concept of stratified sampling. Stratified sampling is again random sampling which takes into account the stratification of the main population into a number of subpopulations. So we will divide the whole population into subpopulations, which will be having some homogeneous characteristics. Okay. And after that, we are going to decide upon the relevant stratification criteria. First of all, what will be the criteria for stratifying the population? Then we will divide the whole population into subpopulation based on this criteria. We will list the units separately in each subpopulation. Next step would be to select the requisite number of units from each subpopulation, and finally consolidate the subsamples for making the main sample. This would be the various steps that we will require for stratified sampling. Now, after this, there is again another subtype which is known as a proportionate stratified random sample. Now, in this the sampling plan, the sample will have a specified characteristics in exact proportion to those characteristics which are distributed in the population. So basically, we have to look into the proportionate stratified random sample of taking. Now this they have given an example here of distribution of students according to year in a college, and this is how you can study by using the proportionate stratified random sampling. And we decide to have maybe a sample of 60 students, so we will determine first the proportion of students in these class, then we're going to calculate the composition of the sample. Okay, and finally we will multiply the 60, the desired sample size, by 0.25. So this will give us this. Now you have to actually just include these formula and use this kind of a sampling process. After that is a disproportionate stratified random sampling, which is similar to the proportionate stratified random sampling, except that in the disproportionate stratified random sampling, you will find that the subsamples are not necessarily distributed according to the proportionate weight. Okay, so it may have that some samples are overrepresented while some are underrepresented. So that is a disproportionate stratified random sampling. After that is the cluster sampling. Here, the area of the study is when the in case where the area of study is generally widespread, large expenses are involved in simple and stratified random sampling. So here, what we can do is that we can have this problem solved by using the cluster sampling method. So cluster sampling, it may be used when it is either impossible to sample an exhaustive list of the cases that make up the target population, and what happens that in cluster sampling, the the whole research area is divided into sub areas which are known as the clusters, and the simple random or stratified method is used to select the clusters. Finally, the researcher will arrive at the ultimate sample size to be studied by selecting the sample from within the clusters, which is carried out on a simple or a stratified random sampling basis. Now, after this probability sampling, we come to the next type of sampling, which is known as the non-probability sampling. Now, non-probability sampling, generally the sampling part is based on the judgment of the researcher. The guiding factors in a non-probability sampling will include the availability of the units, the personal experience of the researcher, and his or her convenience in carrying out a survey. Now, since these samples are not prepared through random sampling techniques, generally they are known as a non-probability samples. And non-probability samples, they are generally classified into accidental samples, quota samples, and purposive samples. Now, what is accidental sampling? Now, accidental sampling, it refers to a method of selecting respondents who happen to meet the researcher and are willing to be interviewed. So, first of all, where the researcher may take the first 100 people he meets who are willing to be interviewed. So, this is an accidental sampling. Next is the quota sampling, where this ensures inclusion of diverse elements of the population in the sample, and at the same time, it ensures that these diverse elements take into account the proportions in which they occur in the population. Okay, so this is the quota sampling. And the third type of sampling is the purposive sampling, where the sampling is based on the presumption that with good judgment one can select the units that are satisfactory in relation to one's requirement. So, if there is a purpose that we have to follow or solve, then we are going to select samples depending upon that. So, we are going to first of all strategize. We will have some common strategy, in the sampling technique when we are selecting the cases that are to be used for data collection. Then is the snowball sampling. Snowball sampling is again a very important snowball sampling where you get information about the respondents from the previous respondent. So it is like when you come to a particular respondent, he or she may give information about the another respondent who can likely be questioned, for the research purpose. So you will find you will go to the second respondent. From the second respondent, you will go to the third respondent. So it's like a snowball. Your area, it keeps on increasing. The number of respondents, it keeps on increasing. This is termed as the snowball sampling. Okay. Now, uh, generally, when we are talking about social work research, you will find that generally many a times we may combine these probability and non-probability sampling in the research process, especially if it is carried out in a series of stages. So we may require probability sampling principles in some and non-probability sampling principles in other stages. It will depend from our field of investigation and also the objective of the study. Now, um, one advantage of using this method is it is relatively inexpensive to select the areas within which the final stages of sampling will take place by probability sampling. And then we can gain advantage of the probability sample at least for the areas. The second example of combining probability and non-probability sampling is involving the opposite strategy. Okay, so it takes a probability sample of elements within a non-probability sample of area. So this is how you can actually combine these two types of samplings in a particular research. Now, again, this is a very important part of social work research and the sampling process. And whenever we are formulating the design of the research, we have to, or the methodology of the research, we have to be very careful in seeing the kind of sampling method that would be suitable to, uh, uh, fulfill the objective of the research. Now, there are several considerations on which the choice of the sampling method will depend. Okay, it will be depending upon the population, the type of population that we are dealing with, the objective of the study, okay, the degree of precision required, the availability of finances and other resources. So all of these are basically some of the factors that we have to take into consideration when we think about the choice of the sampling method. Now, basically, this okay. So after this, we go on to this brings an end to the sampling method. So we have studied the two types of samples, the probability sampling and the non-probability sampling. Now we will go to inquire about various research tools which are used in research work. So how do you collect data? You know, so this is basically some of the tools that are used for collecting data. Now, what is the concept of measurement in social research? The concept of measurement in social research, it simply refers to the process of describing the abstract concepts in terms of the specific indicators by assigning numbers to these indicants in accordance with rules. Now, this is a very important prerequisite because of a number of reasons. One of the important reasons is allowing the researcher the opportunity of using these phenomena in hypothesis building, okay, and to determine the effects of a set of variables on other variables. So, measurement in social research is very important for these two reasons. Now, uh, which now here you can say that basically there are certain levels of measurements that we have to that can be taken into consideration, and the social phenomena as such can be measured in a number of ways. So variables, they can be operationally defined at one or more of the four levels of measurement. So there are basically four levels of measurements when we talk about the social sciences. One is what is known as the nominal level. Second is the ordinal level. Third is the ratio level, and the final is the interval level. These refers to a set of rules that defines the permissible mathematical functions that can be performed on the numbers or scores which are produced by a measure. So nominal level of measurement, these are defined in terms of qualitative attributes that are categorical. Okay. For example, in terms of whether you as a person you're receiving some kind of a social services, yes or no. Then second is the ordinal level of measurement. It can be rank ordered. The ordinal level of measurement, it can be rank ordered. And you know that in different attributes represents relatively more or less of the variables. But the differences between the attributes, they are not precise. And at the ordinal level, we know that only whether one case has more or less of something than the other case. So, but we do not know how much more. So then in such cases, we use the ordinal level of measurement. The third is the interval level of measurement. That is the disturbance between the different levels have the difference between the different levels have the same meanings, and thus the difference between IQ scores, for example, in this particular part, the difference between IQ scores of 95 and 100 is considered to be of the same magnitude as the difference between 100 and 105 IP social adjustments. Okay. Now, nominal level. Now, what happens? Interval level between the categories of measurements, they have equal spacing in addition to the characteristic of the nominal level and ordinal level. And in interval measures, we will find that the positions are not only ordered, either it can be in ascending order or it can be in descending order, but the intervals of measurement are also equal. So this makes it an interval level of measurement. And finally, we have the ratio level of measurement, where the variables at the ratio level of measurement have the same attributes as interval level, but in addition, they have a 0 point. Okay, so there can also be a 0 point, and this is known as a ratio level of measurement. Now, then we come to the various tools of data collection after the levels of measurement. First is what is known as a questionnaire. Now, questionnaire is a very commonly used tool which we use to collect a variety of data, and it is includes a series of questions that can be pertaining to psychological aspects, social aspects, or educational aspects, or any other issues that are sent to an individual or group with the aim of obtaining the relevant data. So that is a questionnaire. So a questionnaire can be classified as a structured questionnaire, okay, or it can be an unstructured questionnaire. Now, within the structured questionnaire, we generally find that in these type of questionnaires, there will be specific questions that will be asked, which can be open-ended or closed-ended. Closed-ended means that they would be generally have specific choices available, made available to the respondents. Okay, like yes, no, don't know, like these. So that is known as the close-ended questions. And open-ended questions are those in which we are open to receiving any kind of an answer from the respondents, and we do not come with any kind of a choices or multiple options. We do not give any multiple options to the respondents. And the second type of a questionnaire is known as the unstructured questionnaire, which is frequently referred to as the interview guide. So you do not have actually a kind of a structured questions here, but rather you go for formulating the questions as and when the interview goes on, as and when the interview progresses. So this is what is known as the unstructured questionnaire. Now, there are certain characteristics of a good questionnaire. First of all, there will always be a purpose. There will always be a purpose. What exactly that questionnaire is all about? What information does it need to, get from the respondents? And also, it will be motivating for the respondents to communicate the required information. So, it will also help the respondents to actually motivate them to get information. So it's the purpose is one important aspect. The second is the language. It should be concise and it should be easily understood by the respondents. The third is the frame of reference. The respondent's frame of reference, influences the answers which are given by the respondents. So if we ask very complicated questions, they may have a lot of problems in answering. So we need to actually break down questions which are either very complex or they are actually some controversial issues. We need to break down into different components so that the researcher can actually determine their respondents' feelings about the various aspects of the problem. Then the sequence of question, the arrangement or ordering of the questions that should also receive special attention. The questionnaire should not be very long or very short. The form of response, it should be very clear, and the responses should be try to give them as little in multiple choice responses is generally desirable. So this kind of responses in the questionnaire, like questions having closed ended questionnaires are always desirable, because one important aspect about them is that the data interpretation and analysis becomes very easy when we come to the use of open closed-ended questions. Now, generally, there are certain limitations of questionnaire. Although, first of all, that the return of the mailed questionnaire, there is always a problem with the questionnaires. Like we cannot use it with children or with people who cannot read or write. Okay, Then sometimes you will find that the questions that we have mailed, they may come back to us in return, so it takes a lot of time and energy. Sometimes the respondents may not like to respond in writing to questions. And then there is also a likelihood that the question are misinterpreted by the respondents. Sometimes they may modify their earlier original responses to the questions when they find the responses as contradicting to the previous question. So there are certain limitations in the questionnaire. Now, the rating scales. Rating scales is basically this is term which is applied to an expression of opinion or a judgment regarding some situation. So, you will find that there will be a set of points which describe the varying degrees of an attribute under investigation. So, they may be broadly categorized into five categories. One is a numerical scale, graphic scale, standard scales, rating by cumulative point, and finally the forced choice ratings. Now, what are numerical scales? Now, it's a sequence of defined numbers is applied to the rater or the observer, and he or she will assign to each stimulus to be rated an appropriate number in line with these definitions or descriptions of the event or the stimulus. Okay, so for example, we may have something like the effective values of colors as being extremely pleasant, moderately pleasant, or indifferent, moderately unpleasant, extremely unpleasant, all of these things. So these can be used in numerical scales. Then we have the graphic scales, which are most widely used for rating scales. So you will have a straight line will be shown vertically as well as horizontally with the various clues to help the rater. And the line is either segmented into units or it is continuous. Now, these graphic scales are comparatively very simple and easy to administer as such. Then we come to the standard scales. In standard scales, you can say that a set of standards is presented to the rater. They are usually objects of the same kind to be rated with pre-established scale values. And in this type is like that of the scales for judging the quality of handwriting. So this is a standard scale. Then is the rating by accumulated points. Now, this unique and distinctive feature of rating by cumulative points is the its immersive use of ease of scoring. Okay. Now, the rating score for an attribute, object, or individual is a sum or average of the weighted or the unweighted points. Okay. So, this is basically one of the methods that we see here. After that, after the rating by accumulated points, we come to the forced choice ratings. So in forced choice ratings, the rater is asked not to say whether the ratee has a certain trait or has how much of it the ratee has, but to essentially say whether he or she has some of one trait or another of a pair. So, for example, if we ask a person if he or she exerts strong influence on in his or her associates, or something like influence that he or she has on others or during the functions, the influence that he or she exerts. So these are the forced choice ratings. Now there are certain limitations of rating scales, like definitely there is an error of leniency. That is, for example, the error of leniency. Now this is basically a constant tendency among the raters to rate those whom they know well. Okay, so this is basically an easy rater. You can say that. So we are going to rate people whom we know well. There can be an error of central tendency here. So the most of the raters, they hesitate to rate the individuals on the extremes of the scales. and generally they rate individuals on the middle of the scales, and this is known as the error of central tendency. Then there is also a halo effect where the uh, the cluster of traits within an individual is obscured. That means that the rater forms a general opinion about a person's merit, and his or her ratings on specific traits are generally influenced by the general impression. So that is the what is known as the halo effect. And there is also a logical error. So when we try to judge, traits that are logically related to each other, then the contrast error is there. It is due to the tendency of a rater to rate others in the opposite direction from himself in a trait. And then the proximity error. That adjacent traits on um, uh, you know, rating scale, they tend to intercorrelate higher than the remote ones. And their degree of actual similarity being approximately small. This is known as the proximity error. Then you have what is known as the attitude scale. This is generally the degree of positive or negative effect associated with a certain psychological entity. So we will have the different types of attitude scales. Now, for example, we will be having scaling techniques related to the equal appearing intervals. Okay, like this was given by Thurston and Clave, and the attitude score of the individuals obtained by this method. Okay, and this is very frequently used in what was in the various psychological studies. After that, there are certain tests that we have to that can be applied. Okay, so we measure, obtain a measure of the characteristics of attributes of a person pertaining to his or her potential knowledge. Okay, say for example, his knowledge of mathematics, of honesty, perseverance, creativity, and how that person answers to such questions. So there can be different types of tests. Okay, so on the basis of administration, there are three categories. So you have the power versus the speed test, you have individual versus the group test, and you have the paper, pencil, and the performance test. So these are the various tests which are generally used. Then, on the basis of standardization, as such, tests can be divided into the non-standardized teacher-made test, and then there can be certain standardized tests as well. And the basis of traits and abilities to be measured, we can have things like the test of general mental ability or intelligence, test of special abilities, test of creativity, and test of attainment, and finally the personality measure. Then there are tests for special abilities or aptitudes. So there can be, tests which are there for special abilities or aptitudes, like these are basically, tests are generally administered for tests described as specialized abilities. Okay, and this helps us to measure the special abilities of individuals or their aptitude. Then there are also tests for creative thinking. So basically, creative thinking, we will have two distinct types of thinking ability, namely convergent thinking and the divergent thinking. Now, convergent is basically a generation of ideas and facts from the available information. And divergent thinking involves generation of novel responses to situations, responses that are original, unusual, and varied. So these are the two types of creative thinking, namely convergent and the divergent thinking. So these come under the test of creative thinking. After that we come to the test of attainment or achievement. So these are tests which are conducted to measure the present performance vis-a-vis the skill or knowledge of the individuals. Okay. As a result of training, when we acquire skills, that's known as attainment or um, 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 achievement test. Okay. Now they are designed to measure an individual's level of learning in a particular discipline. So how well a person has learned, when it comes to a particular discipline. All of these things we are going to test in the test of attainment or achievement. And then we have the personality measures. Personality measures are either projective or what is known as the projective techniques or the non-projective techniques. Projective techniques are used to make an assessment of the various aspects of personality which cannot be measured easily by any other means. That is a projective technique. And non-projective techniques is basically the techniques of personality measurement, which can include personality invention, inventories, interest inventories, value inventories, etc. Now, what are the uses of test? When we say that we are using a test, what help do they give us? Now, they generally provide knowledge which are concerning the learners. Okay. They also serve various purposes in the process of counseling and guidance. Tests may also be used, make use of psychological tests in business and industries, okay, and pertain to decision about the personnel. So these are some of the, some of the important uh, information regarding um, these tests. And needless to say that they have a wide variety of application. So specifically in the sphere of psychology, you will have these tests and very it is very frequently used in the psychology practicals as well as for gathering information for research. Now there are certain limitations of these tests. They should not be considered first of all as absolute measure to measure the intelligence of creative thinking. So they are definitely far from that. Second, they often use inventories are often used for personality assessment, and they have very low predictive validity, and especially when the subjects are tested who are below the 17 years of age, that is, who are children. These tests can highly then they can hardly measure very higher mental processes. Okay. And the strength and depth of understanding of individual and appreciative reactions in ethical, social, or aesthetic fields cannot also be measured by these tests. So these are certain limitations of the test. But needless to say that despite this, tests continue to be very important, especially in the psychological studies. After this, we come to the third unit, which talks about the interview, observation, and documents. Now, these are some other tools of data collection that can be used, and very often we have seen that, especially in qualitative studies, these tools are used. After this, now, first of all, we come to the first type of the first tool, that is the interview. Now, interview can be called as a process of communication or interaction in which the subject or the interviewee gives the needed information verbally or in a face-to-face situation. So interview can be done either face to face, or it can be generally done through other phonic other means, like by maybe use of telephone, or maybe by use of interview by on through webcams, or even some other. Nowadays there are so many method of communication that can be used, and specifically for situations when the respondents are not physically available to the researcher, then these other methods can also be used for the interview purpose. Now, interviews, there are of different types. Either they can be a structured interview, or they can be unstructured interview. So depending upon um, the type of questions, if they are they are carefully structured before taking up the interview, it is known as the structured interview. And if the interviews are not they are not carefully planned before taking the interview, it's known as an unstructured interview. Then sometimes interview may also require one or more than one respondent. So it can be an individual interview or a group interview, depending upon the number of persons who are being interviewed. Okay. So generally, these are the different types of interviews that are generally there. Now, there are certain techniques which have to be used, for interviewing. These techniques deal with preparing for the interview, conducting the interview, and finally recording the information which has been gathered. Now, preparation for the interview is the first part that has to be taken into consideration when we start using interview as a tool. So, first we need to make a preparation of the interview. Here we will make up the necessary planning, whether we are going for a structured interview or for an unstructured interview. Okay, then we are also going to see in we are also going to see if we are going for a structured interview, then we have to carefully frame the questions before we actually, go for the interview. So that procedure has to be completed in the first part. Then the second is the conducting that interview. So the we have to conduct the interview also in a very careful manner, and make sure that we ask questions properly. We ask one question at a time. The questions that we ask are generally relevant to what the data that we need to retrieve from the respondent. And also we have to be very observant about about the way the person is you know responding to the questions. We have to listen carefully to the interviewee's answer and avoid any giving any kind of suggestions during the interview. We have to observe not only what they are speaking, but also observe the non-verbal communication part, which would include their body language, their facial expressions, their gestures, their tone of voice, all of these things. Then also we need to be very reserved in showing our feelings, or our responses towards the responses of the interviewee. So uh, avoid giving any kind of surprised look or a shock look, or having any kind of an anger during the interview. Then um, whenever we are going through controversial issues, we need to maintain a very neutral stance or a very neutral attitude towards the whole thing. And whenever we need to whenever we come across questions which are where the answers are, they seem to be quite vague or ambiguous or evasive, then we need to take note of those particular questions. And tact and skill need to be employed in order to get more and more data from the person. So how see how we can get more and more information from the person by asking questions in different manner. Then recording of the interview is something which is very important, because we may not understand or remember all of the responses that the interviewee has made to our questions. So that is why this recording needs to be done. Okay. The interviewer may use a schedule, or may use a structured format, a rating scale, or sometimes even a tape recorder or a camera, maybe at times, to record all the answers that have been given by the interviewee. Now, apart from the fact that interview is used for a variety of purpose, there are certain limitations of the interview method. First of all, interview is a very time consuming technique. There is always a very, very great danger of subjectivity in this case. A lot of things, a lot of times, the effectiveness of using this particular tool depends upon the skill of the interviewer. How skillful you are as an interviewer, how well you are able to get the facts out of the person in who has been interviewed. And interviews generally provide very it is sometimes it may not be very appropriate for asking questions which may be controversial, or something which is very personal to the respondent. So all of these are certain limitations are definitely there. Next tool is called as the observation. Observation, as we have already seen, basically means observing the persons, okay, or the real life situations, and then recording the pertinent occurrences. So there are two types of observations here. One is known as the participant observation, and the second is known as the non-participant observation. Now, generally, in a participant observation, we say that the observer or the researcher becomes more or less one of the group members who are actually participating in the research process. So, for example, when we in ethnographic studies, like in sociology or in anthropological studies, when we are going for ethnographic studies, we may use the participant and non-participant observation method. Specifically, the participant observation, where the person is going to get involved with the community who is being researched, or who about whom the data is being gathered. So the researcher may become a part of that community and become actively participate in this. The other type is known as a non-participant observation, where the person who is actually observing does not participate in the group process. Okay, he is maintains distance from the group. Okay, and but follows the behavior of the individuals or the groups very closely. Now, observations may sometimes also be classified on into two categories. One is the unstructured observation, and second is the structured observation. Structured observation is generally very formal and generally designed to provide systematic description of to test causal hypothesis. Okay, generally they are executed in very controlled settings, like it can be conducted in a in closed classrooms, in laboratories, all of these settings, and these are relatively with specific formulations. So you these are the structured observation, and the other hand you have the unstructured observations, where it is often associated with participant observation, and it's often an exploratory exercises. So you do not go for any kind of a very structured or a controlled situation, but you consider the aspects of behavior in terms of their context, or in situations which are actually in the natural settings. Now there are different stages when it comes to in the process of observation. First is what is known as the planning for observation. So during the first phase, we are going to plan for the observation. Okay. So planning will involve, defining specific activities or units of behavior that has to be observed, the nature of the groups or subjects that we will observe, the scope of observations, all of these things we are going to plan beforehand. Second is the execution of observation, where we will actually go and start our observation. So for that also, we need proper arrangement to finally observe the subjects. Okay, we have to assume proper role or a physical position for observing. We have to focus our attention on the specific activities or the units of behavior under observation. Then proper handling of recording instruments that has to be done, and utilizing one's training and experience fairly effectively in terms of making the observation and recording the facts, and finally recording and interpreting the observation. This is the third step that we have to take, that we have to record the observations and we have to interpret the observations later. And these can be again, several instruments can be used in order to observe. For example, um, mechanical instruments like, use of stopwatches, tape recorders, cameras, binoculars, audiometers, screens, mirrors, all these can be used in order to observe to a greater accuracy. Okay, and these observations are very important in the data collection process. Now, observations are very frequently used in research, in almost all kinds of researches, where we have to observe either the social phenomena or the unit or whatever unit we are studying. Now, despite their uses, their vast uses, there are certain limitations. For example, we have already seen that this is a very time-consuming and costly process. There can be a lot of biases, specifically in observation processes. And sometimes when we are intentionally attempting to study a group, the group may not actually behave according to their natural behavior. They may not behave naturally, they may behave very artificially, or that may give us very different readings or observations. So there are certain limitations, but despite these limitations, nevertheless, observation continues to be a very important tool for data collection. Now, what do you understand by documents in research? Documents are generally records which describe a process of personal or a group development for the occurrence of an event. So generally the content of the document, they are reviewed in terms of the research problems before they are actually used by the researcher. So whatever research problem we are looking into, we will assert the kind of document we will employ in order to record the data. Now, the data which is obtained through observation or use of tests or questionnaires or interviews, they are gathered for a specific purpose. Okay, and documents, on the other hand, you can say they bring together data of remote periods and places of scientific analysis. So documents will generally be mostly be the secondary kind of data collection that we have. Now, there are different types of documents which can be characterized into different types. One is the expressive documents, which can be personal letters, it can be case histories in the form of diaries or biographies or autobiographies, or it could be accounts of a small group processes. All these tend to be expressive documents. And after that, we can also have what are known as the official records, which is generally the information that we get, government records, or these could be related to records of death, birth, marriages, divorces, or maybe even things like institutional attendance. Okay, it could be the FIRs, which are the prison records, registrations, voting, social security payments and benefits, the hospital data, and any such data which are actually kept officially. Okay, so it could be also some other official records like the legislative documents, judicial documents, or some other executive documents which may be used by the researcher to understand a particular problem at hand. So these are the expressive documents, and then we have the official documents. Okay. Then there could be certain journals also. So, for example, information about certain new ideas and developments, they often appear in journals. Okay, so these journal records, these can also be used as certain documents. So these are the various tools that we have used for data collection. And generally, we will find that these are generally methods for both primary data collection as well as the secondary data collection. Now we come to this process of data collection. What exactly do you understand by data? What is the method of data collection? What are the quality, ensuring the quality of data and all these things? We are going to see in this last unit. Now, data can be referred to any information which is collected from different sources through the use of different tools and techniques, which could be use of numerical figures, it could be rating, it could be descriptive narrations, it could be response to open-ended questions or close-ended questions, it could be even field notes or any other such documents or information that is gathered through various tools and techniques. Now, this information is generally called as the data, and data can be categorized as qualitative data and also as a quantitative data. Now, qualitative data is basically obtained by applying various scales of measurements. Here, the experience of the people, it is collected in order to fit into standard responses to which numerical values are attached. Okay, this is a quantitative data. This data is generally closed-ended and it hardly provides any depth or detail. So generally, you will generally find that there are some quantitative values which are assigned to against the responses, and these are generally very superficial data. Qualitative data, on the other hand, it is verbal or symbolic data, which is generally come up by observing the behavior of people, situation, or even by observing certain events. And these are could be in the form of responses to open-ended questions or using an interview schedule. It could be first-hand information from people about their experiences, their ideas, their beliefs, or selected content or excerpts from certain other documents in terms of case histories, personal diaries, or letters. These are all examples of a qualitative data. Now, what are the various methods of data collection? We have already seen these methods. First is by asking questions, which can be done by interviews, it can be done by, by other methods of data collection. The second is observing the behavior of persons, groups, or organizations by observations. And third is by using the existing record or the data which is already gathered. So this is the by using the secondary data methods. Asking question, we have already seen before how we can use questionnaire or schedules. We can use tests or inventories in order to ask questions from the respondents. And so, okay, this is basically a repetition of what we have already studied. Then observation of behavior, which we have already seen. It can be either a direct observation or it can be an indirect or a indirect observation, or it can be a participant observation and a non-participant observation. Okay, then utilization of existing record or data. So you can look into the various records, which could either be personal record or it could also be the official record. So these are the three ways in which data can be gathered. Now, how do we ensure the quality of data? Now, the adequacy of tool or technique for collection of data is generally judged by the terms of the criteria of reliability. We have to see whether the data is reliable or consistent, whether it is valid, and whether it is usable. So whatever information we have gathered, whatever data we have gathered, does it corresponds to what we intend to find out or the objective of our research? Reliability, it requires that repeated measurements yield results which are identical. So if we are, repeating this exercise, it should give us the same kind of a inference. Validity demands that measurement should be meaningfully related to the research objectives. Okay, so whatever questions or objectives that we have planned for the research, whether that data is valid, whether it is helping us understand those objectives or come to the conclusions, and usability, it ensures objectivity in the use of tool or technique and economy of time. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration when we are talking about the kind of tool that we will use for collecting the data. Now, the researcher, it is important that the researcher choose the subject very carefully, and in order to consider the whether this is what are some of the guiding principles which a researcher should consider while using questionnaire or schedules for generating data that is going to be valid, reliable, as well as usable. So for this, the researcher should choose a subject very carefully. Okay, whatever the subjects we have selected, it should possess the desired information and likely to be kept to keen to respond conscientiously and objectively. Then um, a questionnaire or a schedule. Okay, it has a very limited purpose. So the question of validity and reliability of these tools, generally it is not dealt very seriously. However, the validity of the data that is gathered through questionnaire, it is generally, it can be improved considerably by making the language of the question less ambiguous. So whatever language we are using in framing the questions for these questionnaire and schedule, we need to keep it very simple and to the point, and something frame the questions in a language which is easily understood by the local community. Now, there are certain problems which is there in all the tools which we have used. So none of the tools that we use for data collection are actually free of, certain limitations. But nevertheless, uh, depending upon the the choice of the questions, or sorry, depending upon the objective of the study, what we intend to find out in our research, or what information we intend to gather. Okay, that means that we have to depending on these considerations, we have to understand and choose the tool very wisely and appropriately in order to get um, um, the data. Now they have over here they have just given the do's and don'ts, which for interview as well as for questionnaire, which we have already studied in our previous part, so we need not go into it again. Okay, so this brings us more or less to an end of this particular block. So, is there any questions related to the particular parts which you intend to ask? Any questions? So till now we have seen that basically we have studied the qualitative as well as the quantitative types of researches. Till now, we have seen what are the various um, the basic concept of scientific research. We have studied in block one what are the various types of researches that are there, how scientific researches in social sciences are different from the scientific research in physical sciences, what are the limitations as well as the challenges of social science researches. Then we also went on to understand the various qualitative methods of research, like the various designs in terms of quasi experimental research and experimental research. We have tried to understand these different designs. We have also tried to understand what qualitative research means. We have gone to understand the basic types of qualitative researches in terms of participatory researches, like the rural appraisal, participatory rural appraisal, excuse me, and also the case study method. We have seen the various tools that can be used for data collection, the type of data. It can be a primary data, it can be secondary data. Also, the tools or techniques that can be used for data collection in terms of interviews, in terms of questionnaires, in terms of various tests and inventories, and also the documents. So these are the various tools and techniques that can be employed to get the data, and how these tools have their own limitations, but despite of these limitations, they are used very frequently for collecting data. We have also seen how sampling can be done. Exactly what sampling is mean, we have seen two types of sampling, the probability sampling and the non-probability sampling, and the subtypes within these two broad categories of sampling. Why is it important to select an appropriate sample which is representative of the population, and how we can step by step, uh, you know, go towards the selection of appropriate sample for data collection. So all these things we have seen today. Any question from any of the students? Anybody would like to add something to the to what has been taught? Now, most of the matter that has been taught to you, as I've already said, is generally very technical. Specifically, when we talk about the quantitative methods and various other sociometric methods which are used within those quantitative methods, okay, so they are generally very technical. Mostly they use certain formulas, and even the otherwise the concept of social science research is again something which is very technical. And I would highly recommend that whenever whatever is taught to you through this online counseling or online period, you need to actually read it again through the various blogs that has been provided to you, so that you ensure that you are able to understand and also remember the things that have been taught to you in the during this period of 2 hours. So I understand that I think none of the students are having any questions. So in this, maybe we can just call it a day, and I will end the meeting now. And in case if any other person is having any kind of questions, maybe you can revert back to me tomorrow. Tomorrow we will have the last session for this research methodology classes, and we will be taking the fourth and the last block of the research, which is basically about the analysis of the data and interpretation of data. So that is the last part of the project proposal formulation, and also the last part of any research that we have to come that we do. So tomorrow we will be discussing the data analysis and the interpretation. So thank you so much once again for joining this class, and I will see you again tomorrow for the counseling session. Thank you for joining, and have a really good day.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Okay, ma'am.